The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows over the pristine stretch of beach. The Bennett family car rolled down the winding coastal road, the ocean breeze wafting through the open windows. Sandy dunes lined the path, dotted with sparse vegetation that whispered in the wind. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the promise of adventure. "Almost there," John Bennett called out cheerfully, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. His wife, Emily, glanced at the map on her phone, nodding in agreement. Their children, 12-year-old Sophie and 10-year-old Max, were buzzing with excitement in the back seat, their faces pressed against the windows as they took in the scenery. The beach house came into view, nestled between towering cliffs and the vast, endless ocean. It was a quaint two-story structure with whitewashed walls and large windows that seemed to invite the outside world in. A wooden deck wrapped around the front, offering a perfect view of the beach below. "Wow," Sophie breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful." "It sure is," Emily agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. "Let's get unpacked and settled in. We've got a whole week to enjoy this place." As they pulled into the gravel driveway, John noticed the house seemed older than it appeared in the photos. The paint was chipped in places, and the wood looked weathered by years of exposure to the elements. But it added to the charm, giving the house a sense of history and character. Inside, the house was cozy and inviting. The living room featured a large stone fireplace, perfect for cool beach nights. The kitchen, though small, was well equipped, and the bedrooms were comfortably furnished. Max immediately claimed the attic bedroom, thrilled by the idea of having his own private space with a view of the ocean. "Look at this," Max shouted from upstairs. "I can see the whole beach from up here." John chuckled, lugging a suitcase up the stairs. "Just remember, you have to share that view with the rest of us." As evening approached, they decided to take a walk along the beach. The sand was cool beneath their feet, the waves lapping gently at the shore. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the sun sinking slowly into the horizon. "It's like a postcard," Emily said softly, her hand intertwined with John's. They walked in companionable silence, the sound of the ocean filling the air. Sophie and Max ran ahead, their laughter ringing out as they chased each other along the water's edge. The beach was deserted, lending an air of tranquility to their surroundings. "Mom, Dad, look," Sophie called out, pointing to something in the sand. They hurried over to see what she had found. Half buried in the sand was an old, rusted ship's lantern, its glass cracked but still intact. "Must have washed up from an old shipwreck," John mused, inspecting the lantern. "This coast has seen its fair share of storms and shipwrecks over the years." "Can we keep it?" Max asked, his eyes shining with curiosity. "I don't see why not," Emily replied. "It's a piece of history." As they made their way back to the house, the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. They settled in for the night, enjoying a simple dinner together before heading to bed, tired but content. But as the house grew quiet and the family drifted off to sleep, a different kind of silence settled over the beach house. It was a stillness that held its breath, a quiet anticipation that whispered through the halls and wrapped around the walls. The wind picked up, carrying with it faint, distant whispers that seemed to echo from the depths of the ocean. And beneath the floorboards, where the sand met the foundation of the house, something ancient and restless began to stir. The first night at the beach house passed in a haze of peaceful sleep for the Bennets. The rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing lullaby. But as dawn broke, something unsettling lingered in the air. Emily was the first to awaken. She stretched and looked out the window, captivated by the morning light dancing on the waves. The beauty of the scene quickly washed away the strange dream she had during the night. An eerie vision of shadowy figures moving silently along the beach, their whispers barely audible over the roar of the ocean. She shook off the feeling and headed downstairs to start breakfast. John soon joined her, his hair tousled and eyes still half closed. "Sleep well?" he asked, stifling a yawn. "Mostly," Emily replied, her brow furrowing slightly. "Had a weird dream, though. Just shadows and whispers. Probably just the new place." John nodded, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Yeah, I had something similar. Must be the ocean air messing with our heads." By the time Sophie and Max came bounding down the stairs, any lingering unease was pushed aside in favor of their excitement for the day ahead. They spent the morning exploring the beach, collecting shells and building sandcastles. The sun was bright, and the sky was a clear, endless blue. As the day wore on, however, the winds began to pick up. By late afternoon, the once gentle breeze had turned into a steady, gusting wind that whipped the waves into frothy peaks and sent sand skittering across the beach. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the atmosphere in the house felt different. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and doors. The family huddled together, seeking comfort in each other's presence. "I swear I heard someone calling my name earlier," Sophie said, her voice small and uncertain. "It was probably just the wind," John assured her, though he exchanged a worried glance with Emily. After dinner, they decided to watch a movie to take their minds off the storm. The sound of the wind outside grew louder, a constant, eerie wail that seemed almost alive. Every now and then, it carried what sounded like distant voices, indistinct and haunting. As the night wore on, the power flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. They scrambled to find flashlights and candles, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. "Maybe we should call it a night," Emily suggested, trying to keep her voice steady. "The storm will pass by morning." Reluctantly, they all headed to bed, though sleep did not come easily. The wind outside seemed to press against the walls, as if seeking entry. Emily lay awake, listening to the strange, mournful sounds carried by the gusts. She could have sworn she heard faint, desperate whispers mingling with the roar of the storm. In the attic room, Max stared at the ceiling, the beam of his flashlight casting shifting patterns in the dark. He thought he heard footsteps outside his door, soft and measured, as if someone was pacing the hallway. "Mom, Dad?" he called out softly, but there was no answer. Gathering his courage, he crept to the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty, but the sense of being watched was palpable. Downstairs, Sophie lay curled up under her blankets, clutching the old ship's lantern they had found on the beach. She could feel an inexplicable chill in the air, and the whispers seemed louder, closer. Emily finally drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened in the early hours by a soft, insistent voice. "Emily," it whispered, seeming to come from all around her. She sat up, heart pounding, and looked around the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. She reached out to shake John awake, but he was already sitting up, eyes wide with the same fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded, swallowing hard. "We need to find out what's going on. Tomorrow." As the first light of dawn broke through the storm clouds, the wind began to die down, and the house fell silent once more. But the Bennett family knew that whatever had haunted their dreams and whispered in the wind was far from gone. It was just waiting, biding its time, for them to uncover the secrets it held. The morning after the storm was clear and calm, the ocean glistening under the rising sun. But the serene view did little to calm the unease that had settled over the Bennett family. Determined to understand the source of the whispers and shadows, John decided to explore the attic more thoroughly. "Let's see if we can find anything that might explain what's going on here," he said, grabbing a flashlight and heading upstairs. The attic was dusty and cluttered, filled with old furniture and forgotten belongings left by previous occupants. As John sifted through the boxes and trunks, he noticed a small wooden chest tucked away in a corner. Its surface was covered in a fine layer of dust, and it seemed to emit a subtle, almost imperceptible chill. "Hey, Emily, come take a look at this," John called out, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Emily climbed the creaky stairs, followed closely by Sophie and Max, who were both eager and apprehensive. John carefully opened the chest, revealing a collection of old, weathered documents and a thick, leather-bound journal. "What is it?" Max asked, peering over his father's shoulder. "It looks like a journal," John replied, pulling it out gently. The cover was worn, the leather cracked and faded, but the pages inside were surprisingly well preserved. Emily leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "Let's see what it says." John opened the journal, and the family gathered around as he began to read the entries aloud. The handwriting was elegant, but hastily scrawled, as if written in desperation. The journal belonged to Captain Nathaniel Gray, a sailor whose ship, the Sea Serpent, had met a tragic fate off the coast near the beach house. "March 15th, 1872, John read, his voice low and steady. "The storm came upon us with a fury unlike any I have ever seen. The waves rose like mountains, and the wind screamed through the rigging. We fought valiantly, but it was no use. The Sea Serpent was driven onto the rocks, and we were lost." A shiver ran through Emily as she listened. The description of the storm felt eerily familiar, echoing the events of the previous night. John continued. "March 16th, 1872. We managed to reach the shore, but our ordeal is far from over. The beach is desolate, and there is a sense of foreboding in the air. Some of the men are injured, and I fear for their lives. We are stranded, with little hope of rescue." As John read on, the entries became increasingly desperate. The captain wrote of mysterious sightings on the beach, ghostly figures that seemed to watch them from the shadows. The men grew paranoid and fearful, and one by one, they began to disappear. March 20th, 1872. I fear we are not alone here. The spirits of the damned haunt this place, their whispers carried on the wind. They call to us, beckoning us to join them in the depths. I pray for deliverance, but I fear it will not come. The final entry was barely legible, the handwriting frantic and uneven. March 22nd, 1872. They have taken the last of my men. I am alone now, and the whispers grow louder. I cannot escape them. They are coming for me. God have mercy on my soul. John closed the journal, a heavy silence settling over the attic. The Bennets exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the captain's tale pressing down on them. "That's intense," Sophie whispered, her eyes wide with fear and fascination. Emily nodded, her mind racing. The whispers, the shadows, it all makes sense now. The spirits of those sailors are still here, trapped and restless. John took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We need to figure out how to help them. Maybe if we can find a way to give them peace, the hauntings will stop." As they descended from the attic, the atmosphere in the house felt heavier, charged with the lingering presence of the past. The ocean outside seemed to whisper its own secrets, the waves crashing against the shore like a mournful lament. Determined to uncover more about the shipwreck and the spirits that haunted them, the Bennets resolved to delve deeper into the history of the beach house and its ghostly inhabitants. They knew their quest for answers would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it was the only way to bring an end to the chilling whispers in the wind. The next night arrived with an unsettling stillness. The wind that had howled the previous evening was now a soft murmur, and the waves lapped gently against the shore. The calm was deceptive, masking the turmoil that lingered beneath the surface of the beach house. After reading Captain Gray's journal, the Bennets felt an oppressive weight hanging over them. Determined to understand more, they decided to take another walk along the beach, hoping to find clues or remnants that might explain the spirit's unrest. As twilight fell, casting long shadows across the sand, Sophie and Max ran ahead, their earlier apprehension replaced by youthful curiosity. John and Emily followed more slowly, their eyes scanning the shoreline for anything unusual. "Dad! Mom! Look!" Sophie's voice rang out, echoing over the sound of the waves. They hurried to where she and Max stood, near the edge of the water. There, half buried in the sand, was another relic from the past, an old rusted ship's bell. "It's from the sea serpent," Max said, brushing sand off the worn metal. The name was faintly etched on the surface, confirming his suspicion. John lifted the bell, feeling its weight and history. This must be part of the ship's wreckage that washed ashore. As they examined the bell, the sky darkened, and a cold breeze swept over the beach. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, and the Bennets felt a creeping sense of unease. "Let's head back," Emily suggested, glancing nervously at the encroaching darkness. They started toward the house, but as they did, Sophie stopped abruptly, her eyes fixed on a point further down the beach. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing. In the dim light, they saw a shadowy figure standing near the water's edge. It was indistinct, its form wavering, as if seen through a fog. The figure seemed to be watching them, its presence both distant and unnervingly close. "Who's there?" John called out, his voice breaking the silence. The figure did not respond. Instead, it began to move, gliding silently along the shore. It left no footprints in the sand, and as it moved, the air around it seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. Fear gripped Emily's heart as she took Sophie's hand. "Let's go now," she urged, pulling her daughter toward the house. John and Max followed, casting wary glances over their shoulders. As they neared the house, the figure stopped and seemed to dissolve into the night, leaving the beach eerily empty. They rushed inside, slamming the door behind them and locking it. "What was that?" Max asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," John admitted, his mind racing. "But I think we've just seen one of the spirits Captain Gray wrote about." Emily shivered, rubbing her arms as if to ward off the lingering chill. They're not just whispers on the wind anymore. They're real, and they're here. They gathered in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace providing a comforting contrast to the darkness outside. John placed the ship's bell on the mantel, a silent reminder of the encounter they had just experienced. Maybe they're trying to communicate with us, Sophie suggested, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. Maybe they need our help. John nodded thoughtfully. Captain Gray's journal mentioned they were seeking peace. We need to find out what we can do to help them move on. As the family settled in for the night, the sense of unease lingered. The house creaked and groaned, and the wind outside seemed to whisper secrets through the cracks in the walls. In the attic, Max lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He could still feel the presence of the figure on the beach, its gaze haunting him. He closed his eyes, trying to push the image from his mind, but sleep was elusive. Sophie clutched the old ship's lantern, feeling a connection to the past that both fascinated and frightened her. She wondered about the lives of the sailors, about the tragedy that had bound their spirits to this place. Emily and John lay side by side, their hands intertwined. They whispered reassurances to each other, but both knew that their time at the beach house was far from over. The spirits of the sea serpent were reaching out, their whispers growing louder, and the Bennets were caught in a web of history and hauntings that they could not ignore. As the night deepened, the whispers returned, more insistent and urgent than before. The Bennets listened, knowing that the spirits were drawing them deeper into their story, leading them toward a truth that had been buried in the sands of time. And beneath the floorboards, where the restless spirits lingered, the shadows began to stir once more, waiting for the moment when the past and present would collide. The next morning dawned with a deceptive calm. The sunlight bathed the beach house in a warm glow, but the unease from the previous night still lingered in the air. Determined to uncover more about the history of the shipwreck and the haunting, John and Emily decided to visit the local library in town. "We need to find out everything we can about the sea serpent and its crew," John said as they drove along the coastal road. "Maybe there's something in the town records or local folklore that can help us understand what's going on." Sophie and Max stayed behind, reluctant to leave the house despite their fear. They spent the morning playing on the beach, trying to shake off the memories of the ghostly encounter. The library was a small, quaint building filled with the scent of old books and polished wood. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Yes," Emily replied. "We're staying at the old beach house down the road, and we found some information about a shipwreck, the sea serpent. We were hoping to learn more about it and the people who lived in the area at the time." The librarian's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition and hesitation crossing her face. "Ah, the sea serpent. That's a tragic story indeed. There's a section on local history at the back of the library. You might find what you're looking for there." John and Emily thanked her and made their way to the history section. They found several dusty volumes detailing the maritime history of the region. As they flipped through the pages, they stumbled upon a newspaper article from 1872, recounting the fateful storm that had doomed the sea serpent. "Here it is," John said, pointing to the article. "Listen to this. The sea serpent, a merchant vessel, was lost in a violent storm off the coast. Despite the efforts of the crew, the ship was driven onto the rocks. Captain Nathaniel Gray and his men were presumed dead, Their bodies never recovered. Emily frowned, her finger tracing the faded print. But we know from the journal that they did make it to shore. Why would the article say they were never recovered? Maybe the town didn't want to acknowledge what happened, John suggested. Or maybe there's more to the story that we haven't uncovered yet. As they continued to search, they found references to other mysterious occurrences along the coast, reports of ghostly apparitions and strange sounds that had persisted for decades. "This place has a history of hauntings," Emily murmured. "It's not just the sea serpent. There's something about this area that seems to attract restless spirits." Their search was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly man who seemed to know the librarian well. He had a weathered face and eyes that held a wealth of stories. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his voice rough but kind. "You're asking about the sea serpent?" John and Emily nodded. "Yes, we're staying in the old beach house, and we've experienced some unusual things." The man sighed, nodding slowly. "I'm not surprised. That house has a dark history tied to the shipwreck. My grandfather used to tell me stories about it. The spirits of those sailors are said to haunt the place, unable to find peace." "Do you know why?" Emily asked, leaning forward eagerly. "There are many tales," the man replied. "Some say the sailors were cursed. Others believe they're searching for something lost to them. But one thing is certain. They're bound to that beach, unable to move on." John glanced at Emily, a sense of urgency in his eyes. "Do you think there's a way to help them?" The man pondered for a moment before speaking. "There might be. My grandfather always said that the key to freeing them lies in understanding their story. If you can uncover what they're searching for, what keeps them tethered to this world, you might be able to help them find peace." With this new information, John and Emily returned to the beach house, their minds racing with possibilities. They knew they needed to delve deeper into the history of the sea serpent and its crew, to uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. Back at the house, Sophie and Max were waiting anxiously. "Did you find anything?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. "We did," John replied, showing them the old newspaper articles and recounting their conversation with the elderly man. "We need to figure out what's keeping the spirits here. It might be the only way to stop the hauntings." As night fell, the family gathered around the fireplace, their determination steeling them against the encroaching darkness. The wind outside began to pick up again, carrying with it the now familiar whispers. This time, however, the Bennetts were ready. They knew they were not alone in their quest, and that the spirits of the sea serpent were reaching out to them, seeking their help to finally find the peace they had been denied for so long. And as the night deepened, the whispers grew clearer, guiding them toward the secrets that lay hidden in the haunted past of the beach house. The following days were a blur of research and ghostly encounters. The Bennetts were determined to uncover the truth behind the spirits of the sea serpent. But as they delved deeper, the hauntings became more intense. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, and disembodied voices echoed through the halls, whispering their names and filling the air with a chilling sense of despair. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room to discuss their findings, the atmosphere in the house shifted ominously. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a heavy, oppressive feeling settled over them. "We found more articles about the sea serpent," John said, spreading the yellowed papers across the table. "But we still don't know what's keeping the spirits here." "Maybe we're missing something," Emily replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "There must be a clue we haven't seen yet." As they pored over the documents, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging the house into darkness. Sophie let out a small scream, and Max clutched the ship's lantern tightly. "What's happening?" Max whispered, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a soft, mournful wail filled the air. It was a sound of deep sorrow and longing, echoing through the house like a lost soul's lament. The family huddled together, fear gripping their hearts. Suddenly, the wail intensified, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. They swirled around Sophie, wrapping her in a cold embrace. Her eyes glazed over, and her body went rigid as if possessed by an unseen force. "Sophie!" Emily cried, reaching out to her daughter, but an invisible barrier seemed to push her back. Sophie's voice emerged, but it was not her own. It was deep and resonant, filled with ancient pain. "Help us! Free us!" the voice intoned, the words echoing with a supernatural power. John and Emily exchanged horrified glances, realizing that the spirits were using Sophie as a conduit to communicate. They knew they had to act quickly. "What do you want?" John demanded, his voice shaking. "How can we help you?" The spirit within Sophie responded, its voice filled with desperation. "Return what was lost. Find the relic. Only then can we find peace." "What relic?" Emily asked, her heart pounding. "Where can we find it?" Sophie's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor, the spirit's hold on her breaking. Emily rushed to her side, cradling her daughter's limp form. "Sophie, are you okay?" Sophie slowly regained consciousness, her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, Dad, it was horrible. I felt their pain, their longing. They need us to find something, a relic that was lost in the shipwreck." John helped Sophie to her feet, his mind racing. "We need to figure out what this relic is and where it might be." As they regrouped, a sense of urgency propelled them forward. They scoured the old documents, searching for any mention of a valuable or significant item that might have been on the sea serpent. Hours passed, and frustration mounted as they found nothing concrete. Finally, Max, who had been quietly reading the captain's journal, spoke up. "Dad, Mom, listen to this. It's from Captain Gray's last entry. We carried a precious artifact, a token of hope for our future. It was lost to the sea, and with it, our souls are bound." "That must be it," John said, his eyes lighting up. "The artifact is the key. If we can find it, we might be able to free the spirits." "But where do we start?" Emily asked, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst the fear. John thought for a moment, then nodded decisively. "We need to search the beach and the surrounding area. The artifact must be somewhere near the wreckage." As night fell once more, the family prepared for their search. Armed with flashlights and a renewed sense of purpose, they ventured out onto the beach. The wind whispering around them like a chorus of lost souls. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the sand, illuminating the path ahead. They walked along the shore, scanning the ground for any sign of the lost artifact. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks added to the suspense, each moment stretching into an eternity. Just as they were about to lose hope, Max stumbled upon something half buried in the sand. He called out, and the family rushed to his side. There, glinting in the moonlight, was a small, intricately carved box. It was weathered, but still intact, the wood and metalwork hinting at its age and significance. "This must be it," John said, carefully lifting the box from the sand. "The artifact." As they opened the box, a soft, ethereal glow emanated from within. Inside was a delicate, jeweled compass, its needle pointing unerringly out to sea. The family felt a wave of emotion wash over them, as if the spirits were expressing their gratitude. "We did it," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We found the relic." But as they stood there, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and the air filled with the mournful wails of the spirits. The sea roared, and a dense fog rolled in, enveloping the beach in an otherworldly mist. The spirits of the sea serpent were not yet at peace. The Bennets knew that the final step in their journey was still ahead, and the true test of their resolve was just beginning. They had to return the relic to its rightful place, and in doing so, they would face the full wrath and sorrow of the lost souls seeking redemption. The ominous fog swirled around the Bennets as they stood on the beach, the glowing compass in John's hands casting eerie shadows on their faces. They knew they had found the artifact, but now they faced the daunting task of returning it to the sea to finally free the restless spirits of the sea serpent. "We need to take it out to where the shipwreck happened," John said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. "We have to return it to the water." "But how do we know where that is?" Max asked, his eyes wide with worry. John looked at the compass, its needle still pointing unwaveringly toward the ocean. "This compass must lead the way. We'll need a boat." Back at the beach house, they found an old rowboat stashed under the porch, covered in dust and cobwebs. It was small but sturdy, and they quickly dragged it to the water's edge. The fog had thickened, and the air was filled with the faint, mournful wails of the spirits, urging them on. With a final, determined look at each other, they climbed into the boat and pushed off from the shore. John rowed with steady strokes, guided by the compass in Emily's hands. The fog enveloped them, reducing their visibility to mere feet, but the compass's glow provided a beacon in the darkness. As they ventured further out, the waves grew rougher, tossing the small boat. The cries of the spirits grew louder, a cacophony of despair that chilled them to the bone. Sophie and Max huddled together, their eyes fixed on the dark, churning waters. After what felt like an eternity, the compass needle began to spin wildly. "We're here," Emily said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the ocean. John stopped rowing, and they sat in tense silence, waiting for a sign. The water beneath them bubbled and churned, and a ghostly light began to emanate from the depths. The spirits were near, their presence palpable. "Now," John said, taking the compass from Emily and holding it over the water. "We need to return the artifact." As he prepared to drop the compass into the sea, the boat rocked violently, nearly capsizing. The spirit's wails intensified, a mixture of anticipation and anguish. John hesitated, then let the compass fall. It sank quickly, disappearing into the dark waters below. For a moment, nothing happened. The boat bobbed on the waves, and the fog pressed in around them. Then slowly, the water began to glow with an ethereal light, illuminating the surrounding fog. The wails of the spirits grew softer, transforming into a harmonious, mournful song. "The spirits," Sophie whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "They're at peace. but the relief was short-lived. The sea suddenly surged, and a massive wave rose up, towering over the small boat. "Hold on!" John shouted, grabbing the oars and trying to steady the boat. The wave crashed down, drenching them and nearly capsizing the vessel. The fog swirled around them, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. The spirit's song became a chorus of voices, urging them to leave. The compass had been returned, but the spirits were not ready to let go completely. They needed more, a final acknowledgement of their story. "We need to finish what we started," Emily said, gripping John's arm. "We have to tell their story, to remember them." John nodded, and with a renewed determination, he began to row back toward the shore. The voices of the spirits accompanied them, a haunting melody that guided them through the fog. As they neared the beach, the fog began to lift, and the glow from the water faded. They pulled the boat onto the shore and collapsed onto the sand, exhausted but resolute. They knew their task was not yet complete. They had to share the story of the sea serpent and its lost crew to ensure the spirit's final peace. Over the next few days, the Bennetts pored over the journal and the historical documents, piecing together the story of Captain Gray and his men. They contacted local historians and the media, determined to share the tale with the world. The story of the sea serpent and its doomed voyage captured the imagination of many, and a memorial was erected on the beach to honor the lost sailors. The spirits' voices grew fainter, their presence less oppressive, as if the acknowledgement they received brought them the peace they had long sought. One evening, as the family stood by the memorial, the wind whispered softly around them. The spirits were finally at rest, their tragic story known and remembered. The beach house, once a place of fear and despair, became a symbol of resilience and redemption. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the water, the Bennetts knew they had fulfilled their mission. The spirits of the sea serpent were free, and the haunted past of the beach house had been laid to rest. The whispers in the wind were now a gentle reminder of a story that would never be forgotten. The peace the Bennetts felt was short-lived. Despite the memorial and their efforts to honor the spirits of the sea serpent, the house grew increasingly restless. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, and shadows flickered in the corners of their vision. It became clear that not all the spirits were at peace. Some were still angry, vengeful, and determined to make their suffering known. One stormy night, the wind howled with a fury that rattled the windows and doors of the beach house. The sky was a roiling mass of dark clouds, and the ocean churned with violent waves. The Bennetts huddled together in the living room, a sense of foreboding hanging heavily in the air. "We did everything we could," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Why are they still here?" John shook his head, frustration and fear etched on his face. "I don't know, but we have to stay strong. We'll figure this out." A sudden, deafening crash of thunder made them jump. The lights flickered, and then the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. The only light came from the fireplace, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the midst of the storm, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. The air grew cold, and the whispers intensified, filling the room with a sense of dread. Sophie clutched Max's hand, her eyes wide with fear. "They're coming," she whispered. The footsteps grew louder, and the door to the living room slowly creaked open. Standing in the doorway was the shadowy figure they had seen on the beach, now fully formed and unmistakably human. It was Captain Nathaniel Gray, his eyes burning with an unearthly light. "You have disturbed our rest," the captain's voice boomed, echoing with centuries of rage. "You think a mere memorial can atone for what was done to us?" John stepped forward, his voice steadied despite his fear. "We only wanted to help. We wanted to bring you peace." The captain's expression twisted into a snarl. "Peace? There can be no peace for us. We were betrayed, left to die by those who should have saved us. And now, you will suffer as we have suffered." As he spoke, the shadows in the room began to coalesce into the forms of other sailors, their faces twisted with pain and anger. The temperature dropped further, and the Bennetts could see their breath misting in the air. "We have to get out of here," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. John nodded, grabbing the flashlight and leading his family toward the back door. But as they moved, the shadows surged forward, blocking their path. The spirits' voices rose in a cacophony of anger and sorrow, filling the air with a tangible sense of despair. "We can't let them trap us here," John said, his mind racing. "We need to find a way to appease them." Emily's eyes widened as an idea struck her. The journal. Captain Gray's journal. There might be something in it that can help. They raced upstairs to the attic, the shadows pursuing them every step of the way. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like the voices of the damned. In the attic, they found the journal where they had left it, and Emily quickly flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry they had missed before. Captain Gray wrote about a betrayal. He suspected someone on the ship had sabotaged their efforts to survive the storm. John read over her shoulder. "If we can prove who betrayed them, maybe we can give them the justice they need to move on." But the attic door slammed shut behind them, and the temperature plummeted further. The spirits were closing in, their forms more solid and menacing. Captain Gray stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. "Justice! There is no justice for the dead," he roared. "We have to try," John said, his voice desperate. "Please let us help you." The captain hesitated, his expression shifting from rage to something more sorrowful. "You cannot change the past, but perhaps you can help us find peace." The shadows wavered, and for a moment, the room grew warmer. John and Emily quickly read through the rest of the journal, finding the names and clues that pointed to the betrayal. They pieced together the story, realizing that one of the crew members had indeed sabotaged the ship's efforts to reach safety, hoping to steal a precious cargo meant to be delivered to the ship's owner. "We know who betrayed you," Emily said, her voice strong despite the fear. "Let us tell your story, reveal the truth. Maybe that will bring you the peace you seek." Captain Gray's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "Do it. Tell our story." As the Bennetts recounted the tale of betrayal and loss, the spirits listened, their forms growing fainter. The storm outside began to abate, and the oppressive cold lifted. The voices of the spirits became a mournful song, echoing through the house and out to the sea. When they finished, Captain Gray stepped forward one last time. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with the mixture of sorrow and relief. "May you never know the suffering we endured." With that, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air. The house grew warmer, the storm passing and leaving a calm, clear night in its wake. The Bennett stood in silence, the weight of the experience settling over them. "We did it," Sophie whispered, tears in her eyes. "We really did it." John nodded, pulling his family close. "Yes, we did. And now, maybe they can finally rest." As they descended the stairs, the house felt different, lighter, freer. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, their story told, and their justice found. The Bennetts knew they would never forget the experience, but they also knew they had helped bring peace to the haunted beach house. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the whispers in the wind faded away, leaving only the gentle sound of the waves and the promise of a new beginning. The dawn broke gently over the beach house, the first rays of sunlight casting a serene glow on the calm waters. The Bennetts, exhausted but resolute, knew their task was not yet complete. The spirits of the sea serpent had shared their story, but the final act of breaking the curse remained. As they gathered in the living room, the morning light filtering through the windows, Emily spoke up. "We need to return the captain's journal to the sea. It's the last link between them and this world." John nodded in agreement. "And we should return the ship's bell and the lantern as well. These artifacts are part of their past, and they need to be laid to rest." They collected the journal, the bell, and the lantern, feeling the weight of history in their hands. The items seemed to hum with a residual energy, a connection to the spirits that had once been tethered to them. "We'll take the boat out again," John said, his voice steady. "This time, we'll make sure everything is returned to the sea where it belongs." The family prepared the rowboat once more, their determination solidifying into a quiet resolve. The ocean was calm, the storm's fury from the previous night a distant memory. As they pushed off from the shore, the fog began to lift, revealing a clear path ahead. They rowed in silence, the only sound the gentle splash of oars cutting through the water. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sea stretched out endlessly before them. The compass, now lying dormant, had fulfilled its purpose, guiding them to this final destination. When they reached the spot where they had previously encountered the spirits, John stopped rowing. The water was still, and a profound silence enveloped them. Emily carefully opened the journal, her fingers tracing the worn pages one last time before closing it and placing it gently in the water. "May you find peace," she whispered, watching as the journal floated for a moment before sinking beneath the surface. Next, Sophie and Max took the ship's bell and the lantern, and with a solemn nod from their parents, they released the artifacts into the sea. The items sank slowly, disappearing into the depths, taking with them the last remnants of the sailors' ties to the mortal world. As the last artifact vanished, a soft, ethereal glow spread across the water, illuminating the area around their boat. The temperature warmed, and a gentle breeze caressed their faces, carrying with it a sense of tranquility and finality. The spirits of the sea serpent appeared once more, but this time they were different. Their forms were less distinct, more serene, and their eyes no longer burned with anger or sorrow. Captain Gray stepped forward, a look of gratitude and relief on his spectral face. "Thank you," he said, his voice a gentle echo on the wind. "You have freed us. We can now rest." The spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. The Bennetts watched in awe as the apparitions merged with the glow, becoming one with the sea and sky. The oppressive weight that had hung over the beach house lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. As the light dissipated, the family sat in the boat, absorbing the quietude of the moment. The water was calm, the sky clear, and the whispers of the past had finally ceased. They rowed back to shore, their hearts lighter than they had been in days. The beach house, once a place of haunting and fear, now felt like a sanctuary, a testament to the power of understanding and compassion. Back on land, they stood together, looking out at the ocean. The house behind them was bathed in the golden light of morning, no longer shadowed by the spirits of the past. "We did it," John said, his voice filled with both relief and pride. "We helped them find peace." Emily nodded, tears of joy in her eyes. "And we broke the curse. The house is finally free." Sophie and Max exchanged smiles, their fear replaced by a sense of accomplishment. They had faced the unknown, uncovered the truth, and brought justice to the lost souls of the sea serpent. As they entered the beach house, it felt like a new beginning. The air was clear, the rooms filled with light, and the oppressive shadows were gone. They knew they would never forget their experience, but they also knew they had turned a place of sorrow into one of healing. The Bennetts spent the rest of their vacation enjoying the beauty of the beach, free from the hauntings that had once plagued them. They swam in the clear waters, walked along the sunlit shore, and reveled in the peace they had helped restore. And when it was time to leave, they did so with a sense of fulfillment, knowing they had not only survived their ordeal, but had brought closure to a chapter of history that had long been forgotten. The beach house stood as a testament to their courage and compassion, a place where the past had finally found rest and the future could begin anew. As they drove away, the whispers in the wind were gone, replaced by the gentle sound of the waves and the promise of new adventures. The curse was broken, the spirits at peace, and the beach house was now a place of light and hope, forever changed by the Bennetts' bravery and determination.